It's Wednesday, July 1st, 2015, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are colleagues Earnest Perry and Amanda Hinnant. On our program this week, a historic week as the Supreme Court rules in a case looking at state subsidies for the Affordable Care Act, fair housing, the death penalty, and the big 5-4 decision in favor of marriage equality on the eve of Pride weekend celebrations, leading to celebrations on the Supreme Court steps, in streets across the country, and in newsrooms. We'll also talk about the Kansas City SARS story that sadly went largely unnoticed because of all of that national news, looking into a culture of sexual harassment in our state's capital. And ours is a business that hinges on competition, except for when it doesn't. I'll explain what I mean by that a little bit later in the show. But first, let's talk about the Supreme Court. We knew there was going to be a lot coming down the pike starting Thursday, and two of those decisions have definite impact here in Missouri. By noon Friday, Boone County was issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples. And when the sun came up Friday morning, there was a constitutional ban on same-sex marriage in this state. By sunset, 5 couples had legally wed in the Boone County courthouse. And the decision Monday upholding the use of a controversial sedative used here in our state in the carrying out of the death penalty. There were a handful of big cases, patterns in the coverage that stood out to you?
Well, I would say one of the patterns is that basically getting the information out quickly, which I think was a good thing. The other is that I think the news organizations expected it. They were ready for it. Even some of them looked like they were ready for it to go the way that it went. So I thought that was intriguing, especially when it came to the marriage equality case. On the Affordable Care Act case, I think that you had some who were not quite sure which way it was going to go, and the I guess the quickness of how that came out. I would think I was sitting in a meeting when it came out, and everyone was sort of stopped what they were doing just to see what was happening. It was just one of those things where I think the media did a good job of getting it out, but the analysis of it, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, the analysis of it I think has been a little back and forth and not as succinct as it should be.
Here in Missouri, what I was going to say, actually, one of the moments that stood out to me specifically was watching and seeing when CNN was there to capture that call from the president to Obergefell. And there's some information about that on our website. Anderson Cooper asking him what would he say to his husband if he had the opportunity. I know when I saw that one live too, I actually started crying at one point. Just hearing the excitement, but at the same time kind of knowing that this long fight, at least as the two of them experienced it, was over and that they had won.
I really appreciated a story closer to home when the Missourian ran the photo of the first couple to get married in the Boone County Courthouse, and I was happy to see that Nora Dietzel was giving people the marriage licenses they were entitled to.
Between the time it took for me to get from work here shortly after it came out to the time it took me to get home, there were already licenses being issued.
And that photo was shared all over the place. Mm-hmm. I think it had almost 200 shares, so that was pretty cool. I mean, I'm a lifelong Missourian, and it was one of those things that kind of took my breath away. I was like, wow, that's the Boone County Courthouse.
Yeah, the one thing that I think the media needs to pivot toward is the resistance that is being shown. Whenever you have cases such as this, is huge civil rights cases, there's always going to be resistance. And you're starting to see some of that now, where I think it was yesterday, Kurt Schaefer, who is the leader, one of the leaders in the legislature, has already said that he's going to file a bill basically that will basically shield ministers who don't want to do same-sex weddings, businesses that don't want to cater to same-sex couples, and these are the types of resistance that you're going to see all over the country. So I think it's going to be incumbent upon the media not to sort of back away now that the decision is being made, and not cover the resistance that they're going to see in very small ways that could wind up being much larger later down the road.
Or what we might be seeing too, even from the business side of things, is private corporations, just as we saw businesses such as Hobby Lobby looking for exceptions to the Affordable Care Act and paying for certain medications and birth control, that we're going to start to see people on religious grounds trying to also back away from some of the things that came out of this case as well.
Yeah. And the other thing is that even when you talk about the Affordable Care Act, I think there's still going to be some resistance there on that one for the simple reason that as long as I think the president is in office, they're going to resist it. But I think as time goes on, it will become a part of American society, just like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and those things.
So here we have cameras in our state courtrooms. Federal courts don't allow them, and the Supreme Court is among the strictest of all. Journalists can't bring in any kind of recording devices at all. That includes telephones. So it's created a bit of a tradition. It's called the running of the interns. News organizations send their interns in to pick up the decisions, printed out on paper, and literally run them to the reporters on the courthouse steps who call the decisions into the newsrooms. Well, the winner both Thursday and Friday last week, she's one of our own, master's student Lauren Langill, who's an intern for CNBC this summer. Some people out there are comparing her because of the quickness and with the depth that she showed to American Pharaoh. I don't know how we feel about that one, the idea of comparing one of our students to a horse. But that aside, this is one of those situations where hundredths of a second can actually matter.
It really does seem like an archaic way of getting information, kind of Pony Express, where nobody's texting the information to somebody else outside. They physically have to run out there. It kind of reminds me of when they choose a new pope and the smoke goes up, and so I was very proud to see that it was one of our master students who was leading the charge, and she clearly got her training on the MKT trail while here in Columbia. I'm not sure, but
yeah, to me, it's one of those things where you still have a branch of the government, the judicial branch, at the high level that clings to the tradition of this is the way that we're going to present major cases to the American public. And so you have this, I think it's even though they put it on their website, they do everything that everyone else does, I think when you have decisions like this, they should be read from and they are read from the bench. I think that they should be live streamed to everyone. Now, I know that they have their reasons for that, and we have a story about that on our Links blog, which sort of explains how some justices aren't sure what their colleagues are going to read in the majority or the minority opinion and all of that. But still, I think in today's age, the public is looking for information, and they're looking for it immediately and transparent and being transparent, and that's just not the way it's done.
It's interesting because we have all of these calls for transparency on the executive branch, and the White House needs to be more transparent. On the legislative branch, Congress or our state houses need to be more transparent. Yet on some level, it's kind of okay with some people that the Supreme Court clings on to this tradition.
Well, I think it's okay for right now, but I think you're seeing more and more where people are calling for this, and they're saying, "Wait a minute, why are we still holding on to this, waiting until CNN puts something out or Bloomberg puts something out? Why can't we just say, okay, today at 9 a.m. the Supreme Court of the United States is going to live stream its decision on this case, and everyone knows that it's going to come."
And is prepared. I mean, how many days did we sit and wait on Mondays and on Thursdays when those decisions are usually handed down, waiting to see, and then, oh, wait, there's not going to be anything today, and everybody's lined back up on Thursday waiting for the next thing to happen. Well, a lot of news organizations make their political leanings known. We know that Fox tends to lean right. We know that the Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, Gawker, they lean left. And Friday, if there was any question, well, it cleared up pretty quickly when a good number of them changed their social media avatars to logos with the rainbow flag imposed. And then Facebook launched a tool that let users, like any one of us, add the gay pride flag to their profile photos with a single click. Early numbers show more than 26 million users clicked on it. Overall, a lot of that coverage on Friday took on a pretty celebratory tone, what felt like some cheerleading from a lot of journalists who were either there or covering it live from studio on TV.
Well, journalists are humans, and they live in the culture. And I personally believe that it's better to know where people are coming from, and for journalists to sort of show what their perspectives are, and then audience members can choose. That's a tool for them to know, oh, I agree with this person, I don't agree with this person. Of course, on the corporate level, that's an economic decision. And the idea of concealing journalistic opinion has always been an economic decision about how much audience shares you're going to get. You know, from when this first started over 100 years ago, it's like, we're going to get the biggest audience because we're not going to have an opinion. And so if the news organization, the corporation is making that decision, that's a financial one, I think they know what they're doing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we're in a time period in which where you stand, when you were talking about transparency a minute ago, and I think that transparency needs to be there. Now, if you're, say, the New York Times or you're the Washington Post or someone like that, and you've been pretty much down the middle and you're covering it objectively, even though I'm not a huge fan of that, I think you can't have an avatar like that, or you can't show a bias in one way. You're just presenting, here's what the decision was, and here's the views of this camp, and here's the views of that camp. But when you have others like the Huffington Post or Fox, whoever, and they do that, that's almost expected. The public has come to understand that there's going to be some sort of favoritism toward one aspect of our culture as opposed to another.
Well, we even saw it a little bit even here locally. So Fox maybe didn't change theirs, but I noticed that whereas KOMU, or even within our School of Journalism publications, KOMU or KBIA or the Missourian didn't, Vox did. And that also speaks a little bit to the differences in the audiences that each of those publications are trying to reach.
Absolutely. I think you know your audience, you know where most of them stand on certain issues, and news organizations tend to reflect that. And that's okay. You know, you have a choice of what you're paying attention to and not paying attention to.
I think as long as the organization is transparent about where it stands and its audience, and even those who may come in casually just to see what's there, they know what's going to be there. As long as they're transparent about it, I think it's fine.
So Saturday, I was doing something, I'll be honest, I don't even remember what it was, but I had CNN on in the background, and then I heard this, and I'll tell you, I put down what I was doing and started listening.
This man dressed in black and white was waving what appears to be a very bad mimicry, but a clear attempt to mimic the ISIS flag, the black and white flag with the distinctive lettering. I mean, if you look at the flag closely, it's clearly not Arabic. In fact, it looks like it could be gobbledygook. But it's very distinctive, the ISIS flag. Anyway, I seem to be the only person who had spotted this. And nobody seems to be raising any questions or pointing it out.
So that was CNN's London assignment editor, Lucy Paul, and that gobbledygook that she describes was actually drawings of sex toys. We spent a lot of time sitting at this table in the last 6 months or year laughing at some of the things that CNN has done in attempts to break news. Remember the snowmobile last winter where they were driving around in the storm after the roads had been closed? But this one kind of feels like a new low.
Yeah, I'm still sort of scratching my head.
Yeah, when I first mentioned this one to you, you just kind of looked at me and gave me the no. Well, the signature Earnest, no.
Yeah, well, I mean, it just goes back to what you said, trying to do whatever they can to bump up the ratings. And with this one, it's one of those things. She went and talked to someone else. She didn't talk to the person who actually had the flag to vet. Right. Exactly what are you doing? What is the point here? And you have to think about it. It was in the middle of a gay pride parade, and you see all sorts of weird things that have nothing to do with gay pride in these parades. And even having spent some time in London last summer, I can tell you they have parades and protests and marches every week. And you could have a protest against, the Israeli occupation of Palestine, and other groups that have nothing to do with that would just show up and sort of protest their own issue.
Join the crowd.
So for her to see that and not do some reporting before going on the air, it's one of those, let's see if we can get some eyeballs, if we can get some people to pay attention and boost our numbers. They got you, so it must have worked.
Well, in the moment when I heard that there was an ISIS flag, I did look up and want to see. Amanda, you're just sitting here shaking your head.
Well, I mean, CNN was obviously trying to foment some sort of panic or fear about a potential terror attack in London. Am I the only one seeing this? There are people out there that don't go ask this person who looks somehow different from everyone else. And what I want to ask you is, why are they not fomenting fear and panic about black churches being set on fire in the South? A wave of them since the massacre at the church. And every news story I've read has said there's no connection between these. And there are over 6 churches that have burned to the ground. It's blowing my mind.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. And that's the thing that bothers me. We talk about this almost every week about the stories that don't get covered when you're spending time on something that really doesn't matter.
Yes.
And if CNN would spend more time covering that, I think that they would see some significant ratings increases as opposed to
people would turn
to. Exactly.
Well, and I will be the first one to say, actually, at the end of the weekend, too, as we're talking about CNN and kind of its missteps as of late, I said this only halfway jokingly, too, after the police had captured and shot the second escaped New York inmate. Well, wait a minute, you know what comes next? And family members are looking at me and going, okay, what comes next? And I said, well, they're going to find the missing plane. That's got to be what comes next, right? What's left for CNN to do? Right. The thing that stands out about this, though, in this segment that we were just talking about is that CNN has attempted to scrub any reference of it. It's been completely removed from its website. Lucy Paul has gone on Twitter and said that she actually never reported that such a thing happened, but we see it. It's still available on YouTube. People responded to her on Twitter basically trying to explain to her how the internet and DVRs work and that she might as well just kind of own up to it.
The lying about that you didn't cover that is just absurd. I mean, it's just absurd. Just own up to it, and you could even make a joke out of it at that point. I mean, it's sex toys. That's pretty easy to make a joke about.
It sort of goes back to what we've talked about before with who's minding the store, who's making sure that things like this don't happen, because it damages your credibility more than you've got those people in there for a couple of minutes and they're looking at it. But after that, and then they realize what it is, they're going to be mocking you. And that can do more damage to your brand than anything else.
It absolutely could. Well, looking back on the news cycle on Friday, there was the marriage equality decision, President Obama delivering the eulogy for Reverend Clementa Pinckney in Charleston, the 2 fugitives, that one of them being shot dead in upstate New York. In the midst of all of that, probably one of the biggest national news story days we've had in a long time, the Kansas City Star published a story about a culture of sexual harassment at the state capitol. It's a story that I think is pretty important and has gotten lost for the most part between Friday and now. Amanda, you had been mentioning to me this is a very important story to you too. And
absolutely.
Has been overlooked.
I'm hoping it got lost. I'm hoping that other outlets in the state or out of state are working to investigate this story. I fear, however, that people take bad behavior by our congressmen and lobbyists for granted and just say this is like the hangover culture that is Jeff City, which is totally ridiculous, but that people are not surprised, and therefore that's why there hasn't been a lot of conversation. I mean, if we want more women in politics in Missouri, you can't have the gatekeepers of politics in Missouri be lecherous men who are sexting interns straight out of college.
Well, I mean, and the one thing about it is, I mean, John Deal and that situation. But you can even go back to the what was going on in terms of the former, and I'm forgetting his name right now, who committed suicide.
Tom Schweik.
Tom Schweik, who committed suicide. I mean, there are a lot of stories that are coming out of Jeff City that just are astounding. And I keep going back to, where were these stories before? We have very good, credible journalists in Jeff City who have a lot of connections to what's going on. And why are these stories just not coming out? When you go and read it, you find out this goes back years.
And there are dozens
of people who will talk about it now. Why weren't they talking about it 6-7 months ago? I'm with you. I'm hoping that this story does not die, because I think this culture needs to be changed. The problem I have is that you have a one-party rule right now. And the question becomes, if it's in that party, or is it in both parties, and will both parties get together and try to deal with this? And I'm not sure whether or not that's going to happen.
Some of the quotes, I would urge all of our listeners and viewers to read the story, because some of the quotes were just amazing from what these women had heard in their time trying to do work in the Capitol. Things like being called a skin turn. It's just astonishing.
I mean, I also question. You also have to have a question. The governor, the Speaker of the House, the leader of the Senate. not just the ones who are there now, but the ones who've been there before under both parties.
Who established a culture and made it,
right.
Who handed it down generation to generation.
But I also think that journalists need to be held accountable as well, because if they knew that this was going on and they did not report on it, then
they're complicit.
They're complicit, exactly.
Absolutely. And I thought one thing that came up a lot in the article was the idea that because they're in Jeff City, they're not accountable because they're not at home. Which really is still no excuse for bad behavior, but it was very much what goes on in Jeff City stays in Jeff City.
But I think the story needs to get out so that the people back home, back in their constituents back home, know that they're doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, and
these are the people that represent you.
And actually call people and start asking questions, because this was all basically from victims' point of view, different victims' points of view. Are they going to start calling the representatives, the lobbyists, the staffers?
So are you surprised, given that was Friday, this is now Wednesday, that we haven't seen follow-up stories or that we haven't seen other news organizations? And I tried to do a pretty extensive search to see if, by yesterday at least, others had jumped onto this or anything of the sort. And you would have expected to at least see an AP, an Associated Press rip and read, where maybe they would summarize it and link to the story for their subscribers, or TV stations that would somehow just kind of re-rack it somehow, or, the Kansas City Star reports, and didn't really see any of that.
No, I did what felt like a thorough Google News search. With the title, with the subject, and there was nothing.
I think this goes back to something that we've talked about over and over again, which is the lack of coverage of state news, especially state government news. You've seen a lot of the bureau reporters either leaving, going and doing something else. Not being rehired. I mean, the Post-Dispatch doesn't have the same number of people. The
Post-Dispatch doesn't have the same staff that they had the last time we sat at this table.
You're absolutely right. And the Kansas City, thank them very much for doing this, but they really didn't have the staff. To me, when I read it, I was thinking, wait a minute, this must have been a Kansas City Star reporter who sort of stumbled upon this story or something of that nature.
I was just kind of hoping that if that came out Friday, perhaps it was a Sunday publication story, and Monday there would be a day 2 story or some kind of a series that would take it one step further.
Well, I'm hoping that happens, and we just don't know.
Because it seems right now pretty intractable, because the women who are being victimized can't complain if they want any kind of career in politics.
Yeah.
So the PBS show, Finding Your Roots, it's one that spawned all kinds of copycats. Henry Louis Gates Jr. led some celebrity in each episode through a genealogical journey.
Well, let's see what we found on your mom's side of the family. We wanted to see what more we could tell Ben Affleck about the roots of his family's interest in social justice.
But that episode with Ben Affleck, it could end up being the downfall of the show. PBS has suspended it now that it's become clear that Affleck exerted influence over the show's producers and got them to omit the fact that one of his ancestors owned slaves. It was a fact that didn't play too well into that social justice storyline. This was one of the things that came out in those thousands of emails that were leaked during the Sony hack. Ben Affleck was basically embarrassed and didn't want that information getting out there, afraid of how it might hurt his image today, and convinced the team to sanitize the episode. Season 3 is in the can, it's ready to go, but PBS is saying no, not until their staff change is made and an independent genealogist is brought in.
Yeah, when this story first came out, I was really surprised because Henry Louis Gates is an acclaimed historian and clearly understands that you can't just change things that actually happened, and you can't omit it because you don't have the full story. So I think that what PBS is doing is saying, look, you need to clean up this situation before we're going to allow you to keep going on this.
Also, unfortunately for Ben Affleck, ironically, more people are going to know about his slaveholding ancestry because he was trying to break the rules on the show. I think that if it had just aired on the show on PBS, it probably wouldn't frankly
fewer people would have ever seen it or really known about it than what has come out here. Well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that, while tragic, kind of brings a smile to my face, and it restores my faith in people a bit. We were talking a little bit ago about how competitive the news business is, how seconds count, and how we'll tie up our shoes and do anything to outrun the competition. not in Oklahoma City, where KFOR's beloved longtime sports anchor died after being hit on his scooter by a driver making an illegal U-turn. KOCO-TV's general manager, competition in town, offered up a full newsroom and operations staff during the funeral, so anyone who wanted to attend could. And in what's become a bit of a breaking news tradition as of late, the staff of the Baltimore Sun sent a bunch of pizzas to the Charleston Post and Courier. That pizza chain started after the Boston Marathon bombing, with the Chicago Tribune sending pizzas to the Boston Globe, and they have since paid it forward, and it's become a chain. But this isn't about pizza, is it?
No, it's not really about pizza. What it's about is understanding that journalists and journalists who have to cover these tragedies need to make sure that someone has their back, and it's those of us who are in the media having each other's backs. And what this television station did is extraordinary, because these staffs are not very large.
No.
So for them to go and cover another station's desk to make sure that news was being covered, while
And to produce a newscast for them, keep their noon show on the air.
Exactly, and to make sure that they were covering their own. That's a lot of work to do, and that really shows that even though there's competition, they're still working together there.
And I'm sure many of them previously worked together or were friends, and so there was a collegiality already built in there. The competition is really advertising competition, not so much among people.
I've often heard that from reporters who spend so much time out in the field that they view their coworkers as the people from the competitive publications who are out in the field covering those beats.
And the thing
with
about
them.
it, these things have happened throughout journalism on a small scale, and they usually don't get publicized. So to actually see it publicized so that people can see, hey, there is a human side.
It's back to that whole we're all humans,
yeah,
too.
exactly.
Time passes quickly on this program, and it looks like we're going to be out of it before we really get a chance to talk about NBC's decision to cut ties with Donald Trump, ending his run on Celebrity Apprentice, and the network's involvement with the Miss Universe pageant system following those comments that he made about Mexican immigrants. Trump says the network's position on immigration is weak. Looking back on our conversation earlier, why would a network possibly have a position on immigration, or anything else for that matter, is another question for another day. Trump says he is considering filing a lawsuit against the network based on that decision. Well, we are pretty much out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. You can read more about all of the topics that we talked about today. There are links on our links blog that you can find under the Programs tab at KBIA.org. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again. Leave us comments or questions, see previews of what we'll be talking about next week, and more. Our thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan for directing today's show, and to Trevor Harris for handling the audio. I'm Amy Simons. Be sure to join us again next week when we're back with you for another edition of Views of the News.